Hello and welcome to the Sam Jack podcast. I'm not a professional, but wait, I am. And as the subtitle alludes to, it's all about the creative freelancer, the entrepreneur, someone, maybe an artist, musician, production tech, filmmaker, producer, anyone carving their own path and creating a better world with what they do and their creativity. So join me every episode. Now, we've been off for a few weeks, so thanks for holding tight. We have a wonderful episode coming up with DJ Saquon. He's an activist, he's an educator. But first, I want to make sure that you are subscribed to us either on our YouTube channel, Viral Media Network 415, and then you'll find the playlist, the Sam Jack Podcast. Well, we've got other great videos to check out there, but if you want to listen to us on your audio streaming service, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else you might podcast. Just search the Sam Jack Podcast. Don't forget to check us out also on our social media. First, you can check us out on our website, viralmedianetwork.com, Facebook and LinkedIn, as well as Alignable. Just search Viral Media Network. And on Instagram, it's at viralmedia.network. Our Twitter handle is media_viral. All those social media threads, we stream a live vlog every Friday at 3 p.m. So check that out. It's about current events, it's about our business development, it's about my personal growth, and you find out more about some behind the scenes stuff with our company. So let's get on to the interview. Now, what's so great about this interview is we were so entrenched in just getting into a great conversation, I forgot to intro the show. So the show kind of starts kind of mid-conversation, but we were talking about who I had on before, Bosco Conte, aka Mr. Electrospit. So in context, we're talking about how he developed, and from that conversation I had with Bosco about how he started developing and building the Electrospit devices here in Oakland at Zoo Labs. So let's get back to the interview with DJ Saquon. Thanks again for watching. Viral Media Network presents the Sam Jack Podcast. I'm not a professional, but wait, I am. Today's guest, producer, activist, and educator, DJ Saquon. Welcome to the Sam Jack Podcast. And then so he's like, oh, I got to go to China. And then like the pandemic hit in China. And
that's what I was thinking. I was like, he's probably not going to China much.
Right. And so then he was forced to come here because that happened way earlier than it happened here, right? And then so just serendipitously, like the zoo had space for him. So he started manufacturing at the zoo. And then he started creating hella jobs locally. So it just like kind of worked out. So we had that conversation. It was pretty cool. But
yeah, he's a legend, man. He produced a lot of hit records, man.
Oh no, for real. That's what's crazy. Because when I first met him, like I knew about Bosco, but like I didn't like put two and two together in the moment, you know, because I'm not like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna meet this dude.
I feel like a lot of people don't know, like his name doesn't really pop up when people are talking about the best, you know, people like to talk about top 5 or the best of all time, and they talk about Bay Area producers, and I feel like his name doesn't come up as much as it should. I think he's definitely in the top 10, and there's a really good case that could be made for him being in the top 5.
No, that's real, and the funny thing about that too is like, right, especially now he's so humble in and of itself that like he doesn't like now he's all about the Electrospit, and he even said it on the podcast where he was just like, I love what I'm doing, but I'm always moving forward. Like I want to be able to like focus on what I'm doing now, you know, and this is like kind of culminates all of what I know from my, you know, he's got the, you know, engineering background, and all that kind of stuff. So anyways.
Yeah. He's constantly moving forward. And that sometimes it can be a trip. Like, you know, I have a radio show. Sometimes we'll have guests on, and I want to, because I'm a nerd about history, I want to ask them a lot of questions, and they're like, they really want to, you know, if they're giving them a portion of their time, if they're giving you a portion of their time, they often want to use it to like benefit their current project, so they can like make money and, you know what I'm saying, like feed their kids or whatever. So always a balance with that kind of stuff. Because for me, I'll get into like talking about like the records they sampled or the equipment they used in 1995 for a record, and they're like, well, I'd rather talk about my current project, but
Yeah, you want to nerd out. Yeah, I totally feel that, dude.
I'm on more on the nerd side, but you kind of gotta. Some people don't want to talk about the past.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember who I was like. I used to do a little journalism, and I did a story on Third Base, the rap group, and they don't really talk to each other anymore. They don't really get along.
Search.
And, Search and Pete Nice don't really talk anymore.
That's crazy.
It's all bad. And I think I was talking to Pete Nice, and I was just like, so tell me some Third Base stories. And he was like, nah, man, we're not talking about that. And I was like, oh, I should obviously check first, but it's kind of like mid-interview, and I had to like really pivot.
That's funny. Yeah, it's funny in the moment when you like thought you're gonna like get on this whole trajectory of like, I'm gonna drop this dope like story, and then it's just like, nope, vault is closed, and it's like, I've actually seen a couple of, because I looked up, like Search was talking about Pete Nice, because Search really, you see Pete Nice, like he was on Vlad TV and all this shit, like, and he's telling the story about like how Hammer like really was like putting a hit out on him or something.
Yeah, and, like Hammer wasn't feeling that they dissed him and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, but it's also like Pete. Pete's not super active with music. He does a few things, but I think he's like selling sports memorabilia or something like that. He's like completely pivoted in his career, and it's like, as a if you're a podcast person or a writer or any kind of journalist, you kind of have to balance that, because it's like, I don't think most people want to hear about his new career. Most people are probably more interested in hearing some stories about Third Base and about MC Hammer putting a hit out on them and all that shit.
Right.
So it's like you have to you have to respect the wishes of the person you're talking to, but at the same time, it's like, as a journalist, you're like, I don't know if people want to hear about like MC Search's new series, his new like line of coffee mugs, that say gas face on them, like people probably want to hear more about like why they're not talking anymore, and like some cool tour stories and what it was like being white rappers on tour with Public Enemy, you know what I mean? Like, there's so much probably amazing shit that went down. So, but
for real,
if you don't want to talk about it, you got to respect it. So
yeah, because I always like for me it was like, I grew up, of course, knowing Beastie Boys day one, and they were, a punk band that pivoted to hip hop, which I didn't know till later. But they were on tour with Public Enemy and Run DMC from day one, and so that's how I knew them. But when I really got to know both groups, I would say that like for me, once I got to know Third Base, I actually thought that they were a little bit more like hip hop, and really more about it. You know what I mean? And like you said, to learn their stories, and the name MC Search has a meaning. Like, he didn't just come up with that. Like, people like crowned him that name, right? Because he like was always searching for like the better lyric and more knowledge, right? I mean, from what I understand, I don't know. You might know more than me, but
it was actually, it was that, but also it was his tag Search, which Search was sort of like, for me as a young kid coming up, being that he was Jewish and was like this hip hop guy who was like not like the Beastie Boys. It seemed like he seemed very natural in the culture. He seemed very natural around black people. And for me coming up, he was someone I kind of identified with, because I was a white dude that was always around a lot of black people and wanted to participate in hip hop, but was constantly being told and being reminded that I was an outsider. And I remember reading maybe an interview with him in maybe The Source, and he talked about that thing being like this guy that was searching, but he also like mentioned that like the spelling of it, SERCH, which sounds like a tag, was his tag. And as a young graffiti writer, I was just like, oh yeah, Search is just like, that's what I want to be when I grow up. You know what I mean? He was someone that I sort of like looked up to in that respect, as like a white Jewish guy that was participating in hip hop, but appeared to have the respect and the credibility of his peers who were black men and women. So to me, like, Search was someone that I looked up to and was sort of like, that's the kind of guy I want to be,
Yeah. I didn't really want to like get into like, I definitely want to talk about race in this interview, but I didn't want to get into it right away. But since we're into it, why not? Like, there's always been that kind of dichotomy of like, hip hop's a black thing, but also like there's hella white people that are into hip hop, and, I think I've even seen interviews of like, Chuck D, excuse me, saying like, you know, the boys out in Long Island are like part of the reason that we sold a lot of our records, and just to acknowledge the fact that like it's a universal art, and like no matter where you're from, if you feel the connection to it, and stay true to the art and true to what it's about, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of crazy things happening these days with appropriation and labels and whatnot. So I really don't know the answer to anything, but yeah.
Where I would land on that is that hip hop is a black art form. It always has been, it always will be. But in a capitalist market, it's marketed and sold to different communities. So just as what happened with rock and roll, which is a black art form, it was marketed as a form of rebellion, racial rebellion, and also partially class rebellion to white youth. And then white youth were able to purchase that rebellion as a lifestyle, which is still something that happens today. That they call lifestyle marketing. Mm-hmm. And hip hop, it took 10 or 15 years, but I mean, the lifestyle marketing obviously now has gotten to the point where, the white and non-black rappers are almost dominant in hip hop in terms of like who's selling records and who's the most visible. So that doesn't change what the art form is. It's just I just think it's important. You have to look at it as something that is created by black people as a form of resistance, and then is marketed by white record labels as a lifestyle to white youth. And black youth have continued to create and innovate and create new forms of music. And so for me, like where I always butt heads with some of the older hip hop DJs is kind of saying like hip hop is something that happened. It was created. It was a moment in time. It was a moment in time in New York City in the 70s. And it sort of sprouted from there. But, in my opinion, by the late 90s, hip hop was over with and has been over with for 20 years. And black youth have continued to evolve and invent and create brilliant new forms of music. They just haven't sort of been marketed yet. Some of them have, but in my opinion, we've been in the post hip hop musical phase for almost 20 years. So.
Yeah, I mean, you could call it like a new form of hip hop, or hip hop is changing, but no, it's like, trap is one thing, but I think you're talking about, kind of that reign, but it's sort of that dichotomy of like, okay, if you define hip hop as this one thing, and some could argue that it's just changing the music, or like you said, it's a new subgenre or a completely different genre that hasn't caught on. And as they say, if it comes out in the New York Times, it's already 10 years passé, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was essentially what happened with hip hop. I think the first time it was called that or named that in the white press, it was in the earlier mid 80s in the Village Voice in New York. So, I mean, you can look at it on the micro level and talk about all the little different specific things about hip hop and the technology of using records and immigration of Jamaicans and West Indians to the Bronx in the early to mid 70s and all those things. But then you can also talk about it on the macro level as a cultural expression of resistance to white supremacy, in which case there's no difference between rock and roll and hip hop. They're essentially the same thing. They sound a little bit different, but they're essentially black forms of protest music and protest culture. So there's different ways to look at it. But I mean, I definitely think like the way that I was raised thinking about hip hop as this manifestation of different art forms, specifically breakdancing, graffiti art, and DJing and MCing, which comprise the musical form, was very specific to New York City. And even though I took up graffiti myself in San Francisco in the late 80s and early and mid 90s, and there were breakdancers out here, to me, those very specific things about what we understood and what people still talk about as like the defining features of hip hop music are very specific to New York. So as soon as the music began to move out of New York, and in my opinion, I've been pretty vocal about saying that Outkast was the group that moved the capital of hip hop or rap music from New York to Atlanta.
Yeah.
And that was in the mid 90s. So you can even say that by the mid 90s, hip hop was over with and rap music still existed. But even if you look at very basic elements of like not sampling hip hop, rap music coming out of Atlanta, starting with Outkast, was using a lot of live instruments. The music had different subject matter. The focus was less on like lyrical dexterity and was focusing a little bit more on sort of like community issues, politics, other stuff, other things like that. You know, an argument can be made that hip hop was over with at that point, and that the region what we moved into, which was now thought of as like regional rap, regional hip hop, the Bay Area had its scene coming up in the '90s. LA, obviously, with NWA and all the groups they had, but you had Nashville, Atlanta, Miami, Philadelphia, all these areas around the country had their own sort of like regional scenes bubbling up, and I'm of the opinion that is past the era of hip hop and is a different era of music in terms of like how we think of like what came out of hip hop or what came after hip hop.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I've never actually heard that, and maybe I'm just a layman, but I mean, that's kind of interesting that you take that approach. I was gonna respond to a few things because you made that analogy about rock and hip hop being, voices of the oppressed, and I would say also the good analogy. I don't know if it's a good analogy, but similarly, musically, how they take elements from other parts of music to make a different music. Rock and roll was taken from blues and a little bit of other music, jazz, and then rhythm and blues, traditional rhythm and blues into rock and roll and doing its own thing. So was hip hop sampled and taking elements of other things, like you said, Jamaica and some of the synth beat and some of the synth sound that was going on in England and Europe and whatnot. I got to give a shout out to Kraftwerk. There's a lot of correlations you can make with hip hop, and obviously there's a lot of rock that was sampled in hip hop too. I mean, that's some of my favorite stuff. It's just like that wailing guitar. I mean, I grew up a metalhead, of course, too, Van Halen and all that grunge era. Right, we're product of the '90s. So
right, but yeah, and even that, and I agree with you that there's a macro and a micro way to look at that as well. It's like all of rock and roll, hip hop, jazz, rhythm and blues, ragtime, all these different expressions of Black resistance happened in a continuum. They didn't sort of like, they were marketed as this like, oh, the rock and roll. And, the sort of revisionist marketing is like the Beatles. When the Beatles invaded America,
right,
that was rock and roll, even though like we all know that that's not how it happened. We all know that Black people invented rock and roll, and that it emerged in the, in the Midwest, in the South, in different areas of also the like Chicago and Detroit. But we can look at it sort of like you said in that sort of like macro way of just sort of like that. It wasn't sampling, but that the blues sort of like morphed into like rhythm and blues, which morphed into rock. It was just like a constant sort of process of artists pushing the boundaries and looking for new sounds. And that naturally, you can look at it very clearly that it naturally led into hip hop. But also then you can look in the micro level and talk about like electricity, what electricity meant to the, like plugging in of instruments meant to the shift between blues and rhythm and blues and then rock. And also like what the advent of sampling technology meant to the creation of hip hop.
Right.
Greg Tate, the writer from New York, he was famous for saying that hip hop was 50% Africa and 50% Japan because so much of it depended on sampling technology and equipment that was formulated in Japan. So there's both things are true. Both of those, the macro level of it, of sort of it being one stream of music that's constantly flowed through the United States, and then these very specific things that define breaks that make them different from each other. But I think for me it's fun to always look at both sides of it to say that like a lot of you listen to old blues records and they're basically saying fuck the police. They're talking about problems they have with police in the Delta area. And then 80 years later, you're hearing hip hop songs that are saying directly "fuck the police."
Right.
And then you have white people in 2020 saying like, "Oh my God, we didn't realize the problem was this bad." And it's like, really? Because there's literally been 4 generations of Black music talking about how bad it is. You must have not been listening, or you must have not believed what they were saying.
Well, I mean, there's definitely a cognitive dissonance if I'm using that term correctly, but like I'm a wrestling fan. I hate to admit it, but also I'm a little proud of it because for wrestling fans, they know the wrestlers know that we know, and they know that we know that they know, kind of thing. It's like, but there's that suspension of disbelief, and I think what you're getting at is there is some of that of like, people want to believe in the American dream and what America stands for as far as freedom and all the kind of stuff that, not only marketing, but, politics, just dumps on you daily. And because of that, I guess it's a rude awakening. But one of the questions I kind of wanted to ask you is like, okay, we saw this for the Occupy. We saw this during Mike Brown. Obviously in the '90s we saw it for Rodney King, and the O.J. Simpson trial was obviously a race thing. And there's a lot of riots going on from ages to ages, and it seems like cyclical. But like, we see a lot of change happening, but a lot of status quo is still coming, back. So, in your opinion, like, is it cyclical and then eventually like it bubbles up, or is this really a swell that we can see like real change happening?
Well, I feel like there's a couple questions. The question about it being cyclical, it might be cyclical, but it depends what your theory of sort of like resistance is, because I think what's happening, what seems pretty clear to me, what's happening is that Black people are rebelling against being oppressed, and in this case specifically, Black people are rebelling against police, white police and Black police, shooting and killing them,
or being complicit too, right?
Right.
That's a big equation part of it.
But so and so the same thing happened in 1992. People are saying like, oh, shit's different now because we have it on camera. But no, we remember that it was on camera in 1992.
Rodney King was all on camera, yeah.
Right, and that was really the first time we really actually saw it.
Yeah.
But we're like people that weren't there, that weren't in the neighborhood or watching the incident, saw it, like, or it got seen around the world.
Yeah.
But the problem of police brutality and police violence and police murder and extra legal murdering of Black people, or some would say lynching, has continued. So whether it's cyclical, whether it relates to like other pressures coming to bear on members of the community, like the economy and other things like that, that's probably a longer discussion. But I mean, it seems clear that people can only take so much murder and abuse for so long until they snap, and then an outburst of anger and rebellion happens. And then what also we can see happening going back even to the 30s, but especially to the riots in the 60s and to 1992 and today, is these competing counter narratives of sort of the liberal counter narrative, which is like, wow, we didn't realize it was this bad. Let's try to see if we can fix it, which really isn't an honest effort to fix it. It's an effort to sort of like make people stop rioting. And then the conservative response, which is the law and order response, which is what we're hearing from Trump now, which we also heard in the 90s from George Bush and Bill Clinton. And we heard in the 30s and 40s and throughout the United States' history when black people have rebelled, which has been, we got to follow that people are breaking the law. And, it's a sort of like law and order rhetoric, which is sort of like then the response is further policing, further criminalization, further violence against poor Black people. So I think we're seeing that now. And I think it's what we're seeing right now is sort of like probably, or in the first couple weeks of the rebellion of summer 2020, we saw what looked like what was going to be a lot of legislative change, but it did not match what was being asked for by the protesters, what was being demanded by the protesters, which was defunding police, abolition of police in many cases, and basically an end to police murdering Black people. And the only way that was really going to happen in many instances was a complete rethinking of how policing is done in the United States, because as many people that are observing of urban policing in the United States have pointed out, the police essentially are an occupying force in poor and Black communities, and they exist violently control those communities. So to say we don't want violence exerted upon us by the police in black communities is to essentially say we want to abolish the police, because that essentially is the role the police have played for the last 150 years.
Yeah.
So I think what we're seeing now is the parsing of that demand, and that demand is sort of being dispersed. And I think it's a little easier for people to buy it, or it's a little easier for it to be sold when you have like a sort of arch villain like Trump in the White House, where people are just sort of like, you know, this guy is basically just like, fuck the protesters, fuck black people, who's essentially a white supremacist. And is
he's pretty blatant about it.
Yeah, so I think it's easier for sort of like the liberal sort of like co-optation of the movement and of the demands, and sort of saying, oh, you said abolish police, but what we're going to do is like wear kente cloth and like this and like kneel down, and then like
a lot of symbolism.
Yeah, like a lot of symbolism intended to sort of like make people stop rioting, make people stop protesting, make people stop destroying property, which is the ultimate concern of the liberal response. The concern is not that the police are killing black people. The concern is that property is going to get destroyed, that cities are going to burn, that the system itself is going to come under attack because people are going to finally have had enough of it. So they're both the right wing and the liberal response are about preserving the system and the status quo as it is. The right wing response is about doing it through force, and the liberal Democrat response is about doing it through sort of like dirty tricks and sort of being like bringing people from Black Lives Matter and different movements and having them run for office and bringing them into the power system, into the power structure. So I think what we're seeing is that happening. And I know it's a really long answer, but what I wanted to say...
It's a podcast, man. It's okay.
when things really will change, when the demands of a militant, street-based protest movement like we are seeing now in the United States will have lasting effect, is when there's mass-based organizations that can sort of like demand that power. So, along the lines of what we saw in the 60s with the Black Panthers and the Brown Berets and SDS and all these different organizations, but I think really even more so mass-based organizations, reinvigoration of unions, and movements that can fight for power, because at this point, honestly, the only mass-based organization that can really even express an extremely watered-down version of all these politics that are being put out is the Democratic Party, and people really have nowhere else to go to sort of like, if there's a hope for sort of like having an impact on how things run in this country. Yeah. And I think also that the people that protest have been very clear that the Democratic Party is part of the problem. So as a group that's protesting and demanding change, and there's no real like power organization to impact that change, then you're in a difficult position. You can just sort of keep going out to the street and protesting every day, but eventually like the police are going to stop sort of like backing off. They're going to stop shooting rubber bullets. They're going to start shooting real bullets, and the protesters know that. And I think now the task for the movement is to build these mass organizations, and it's going to take years. It's not going to take months, but this is something me and others have been talking about for generations, and people in the 60s were talking about it. If there aren't mass-based organizations where literally millions of black people, working people, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people, oppressed people are organized in mass-based organizations, there is no way to demand anything of the government in this country. And there's no way to destroy the government in this country, because you're essentially like small dispersed groups of rebels in the street fighting the good fight and doing good things, but like not in a position organizationally to take on something as powerful as the government of the United States.
Yeah, it's I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think you're right in a lot of ways. I mean, for someone like me that's not as active, down for the cause, but just not as active, and wishes they were. But like, it's complex for those that aren't fully engaged in that process. So I would ask, like, for those that feel a little intimidated by all of that, like, how would you say is a good way to get involved and like sort of bring those separate parties together, because I feel like, you know, we're in a state in 2020 of different tribes. It's all about tribes, right? And labels, like, you know, and being able to come to, you know, being able to have an identity and be proud of that identity, but yet still have a greater good, that we can all come together and realize that our similarities, we have more in common than we do in difference, and they want us to separate and struggle with each other, like you said, to sort of keep us occupied and keep us oppressed, right? They want us like crabs in a bucket, right? Fighting against each other as opposed to fighting the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some cases that's true. In other cases, it's not. I think, you know, I'm someone who comes from a Marxist background, so I definitely see where people have opposing interests. I think the masses of people in the United States have a unified interest and would do better under a different kind of government. But I don't think that I have the same. At the end of the day, I don't think I have the same interests in the world and have more in common than, rather than less than in common with someone like Donald Trump. I think I have opposing interests as Donald Trump. I don't think me and him and many of the people that he represents, who I may have a similar economic background as, I may have the same skin color as, but ultimately, like, are not going to be people that I'm going to have the same vision of for the world. So I do think blood is going to need to spill in this country for there to ultimately be justice, real justice. Knowing the history of this country and knowing what it comes from and what it will do to maintain its position in the world. That being said, towards your question of like what can people do on different levels, I think a big thing that a lot of white people can do that are sort of like not sure how to get involved, don't want to maybe like take up too much space in the movement, and or like are ready to commit to being activists. I think obviously it's important to do a lot of work to unpack like white supremacy and how it's benefited you. If you've done that, and you sort of like still are like, I don't know if I'm really ready to like put my body on the line for that. There's other things that you can do. You can money is a big thing. Giving money to organizations and to individuals. The process of redistribution, which is now, you know, there's been talks of reparations for Black people for chattel slavery in this country.
Hey, it's happened in Asheville, right? That's the latest news, huh? Asheville, North Carolina.
They voted, but I think like anything. I mean, that's, reparations is a big discussion, and maybe not one for a couple white guys to have.
Yeah.
I think that like the reality of if it's going to happen in a real way, it's going to be something that happens internationally, because the triangle slave trade was an international phenomenon, and so these sort of like things were like a different city, a city with a progressive mayor and a progressive board of supervisors is like, you know, while I don't think they're bad things, I think like ultimately like that's not really what reparations is about. Reparations is going to be about a generational payback, which will break capitalism globally, should break capitalism globally, because honestly, we wouldn't have global capitalism without the global slave trade that emerged, you know, in the last 500 years.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say is that, you know, sort of like the thinking of like how that form of reparations exists as sort of like this thing that's going to be sort of like a UN or global decision to like repay descendants of slaves for the for chattel slavery that existed for 500 years, 300 years, is kind of also being like repositioned, or what's being added to that is sort of like how white people interact with Black people presently, and that's sort of like an understanding of the privilege and the power that white supremacy has given white people to this day, and that our privilege and us being paid more for the same work, us being hired for jobs that Black people aren't hired for, us being not discriminated against in various forms of employment, food, academics, education, housing, basically every facet of society, that one way that doesn't reverse that but can help in a small way to mitigate that is the transference of money. So generational, whether it's on a big scale of generational wealth accumulated by white people, or if you're a working class person like me, then whatever amounts of money I make in my DJ gigs or as a social worker. For me, a lot of it has been about like booking black DJs to DJ at my parties, or giving money where I can, especially over this last COVID period during the quarantine. I've donated thousands of dollars to different work organizations or work groups, just because I understand that the historical mechanics of white supremacy have put me in a position that's different from other people. So that's something that I think people that don't want to, aren't interested, aren't able to, haven't realized that they need to be on the front lines of the fight in the streets, confronting the police, taking pepper spray shots off the dome. If you're sort of like, okay, watching black people do that on TV and sitting at home, then I think at the minimum what you can do is like donate money to those people that get arrested, to those people that are injured in the front lines for those fights. But again, to me, that's kind of the minimum.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely that aspect of like, oh, we see it on TV and we're down for the cause, but at the same time, like, I don't want to get my hands dirty. But like you said, like, at the bare minimum, you're gonna have to just get uncomfortable in how you interact with people if you're not used to interacting with people of different races or different ethnicities. But also, like you said, from an activist standpoint, like, not only blood will be shed, but like you're gonna have to get out in the streets and like let people know like how you feel about things. My light just kicked, so now we're getting really funky with the lighting. See?
Yeah, I noticed that. I was like,
my battery died. I had this.
I thought you were trying to set the mood for us or something. I was like,
thank you so much for listening. This is Sam Jack, your host. Make sure to subscribe to us. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcast. Just search the Sam Jack Podcast. Thank you so much. You can find us on YouTube. Our channel is Viral Media Network 415. The playlist is the Sam Jack Podcast. I'm not a professional, but wait, I am. Check out all the other great playlists on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the interview. All right, so we were talking about
some heavy political stuff, and maybe I don't know, maybe it'd be a good time to pivot to music stuff because
it's cool.
We're talking about lights and shit.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to know. Well, we mentioned Vincent Price, and this has nothing really to do with music, but of course he was sampled in Thriller. But
yeah,
have you? I don't know if you're Vincent Price.
He actually was on. He was in the studio.
They recorded him for that.
He was like in the studio, and I remember Michael Jackson saying like, "He's scary." Like, I remember because that album is still, I think, the greatest selling album of all time. And I remember Michael saying like when Vincent Price came in the studio, he had like his suit on and everything. It's like this old
the ascot. Yeah.
And Michael just being like, "I was scared."
So I don't know if you know any of his movies. Of course, he was in the original Fly. But have you ever seen The Tingler?
No.
All right, I recommend it. I actually have it on DVD if you want to borrow it. But it's basically the premise is he's like a neurological scientist, and he's studying the state of fear and how.
I'm gonna put this in my movie note.
It's black and white with like the fake the actual practical special effects as opposed to and
I mean Vincent Price's heyday was like the 40s, 50s.
40s, 50s. Yeah, he spanned. I think he even like got his start. Like he's so old. I think he actually got to start like as a young kid in vaudeville. You know what I mean? Like I think that's how old he is.
Like, and then movies were silent and shit.
Yeah, like, he was probably, like, in his teens or something, but, like, like, Charlie Chaplin was just probably, like, winding down when he was a kid or something, but he's one of those guys that, like, literally seen it all, like, probably died when the internet just started or something, you know what I mean? Like, he probably died in, like, late 90s, early 2000s.
He died in the early 90s, and he was, like, really old. He was, like, probably around 90, so, yeah. In the silent film era, the teens and the 20s, he probably was just starting out.
Yeah, but like so, The Tingler's about he's studying the state of fear, And he's like, okay, it's not just a feeling; it's actually like a living organism inside your body. And the only way it comes to actual full manifestation in its own, organism form, is when you are scared to death.
So your brain basically brings it out.
Yeah, exactly. So it manifests, I guess, in the vertebrae. So he basically finds like a subject to like scare to death, and then he extracts it, and of course, like he extracts it, and then it gets loose, and so it's like this weird vertebrae creature thing. It's like
it changes from a psychological thriller to like a horror movie, basically.
Yeah. But it
sounds like my kind of shit.
But when the movie came out, this is the movie that they actually put like shock in like every 10 seats. They would put like the little shockers.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Tight.
So like at certain scenes, it was like interactive.
That's really cool. Yeah. I feel like Hollywood was like. I mean, obviously we have IMAX and all that kind of stuff now, and now we're also in like almost. It feels like with the quarantine, we're like in the post-cinema era. Like everything already was moving towards home streaming, and now it's like my friend was like, "Oh yeah, the new Spike Lee movie came out." I'm like, "But the movie theaters are closed." He's like, "No, it came out on Netflix." And I'm just like, "Fuck," because I'm one of those people that grew up like really, to this day, I love going to movie theaters.
Yeah, it's a whole experience.
So, but I feel like it's a generational thing, and we're losing that. But yeah, I feel like that era of Hollywood where they were like coming out with 3D glasses and drive-in movies, and like some of the seats had shockers in them. They were really kind of like pushing the line of like, really trying to like make people almost making movies almost like when you go into a haunted house or something, like a multi-sensory experience versus just seeing things.
Yep.
And yeah, it's kind of, I don't know, that kind of shit excites me. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, I studied, one of the books we had to read in college was Marshall McLuhan, The Media is the Message.
Yes, classic.
Yeah, so he talks a lot about, what different media does to you. So, like, television being hot because you're in a smaller room, usually closer to the screen, and where the image and whatever is being portrayed on the screen is being thrown at you in a hot way. Directly at you, right in your face.
Right. 27 frames per second or whatever TV is.
Whereas film, it's a cooler, and also the way it's closer to you. So like whatever it's portraying is going to be right there at you. Where film, there's a lot of in traditional theaters, there's a lot of other outside factors. The person sitting next to you, how comfortable you are in your seat, whether or not you're thirsty or you have to go to the bathroom, people talking next to you, how cold or hot the theater is. So like. Those different elements, or I guess you should say senses, affect how you interpret the whatever's being shown.
Right.
So
I need to go back and reread that.
Yeah, I do too. That's the one thing I kind of remember is like he like coined the term in a certain sense, hot and cool. What it means to be hot and cool, and then people like co-opted into whatever. Lexicon, but I was gonna say like just to share my journey about like I'm not gonna call myself woke by any means, but I grew up in a very sheltered area, Palo Alto, and the dichotomy is real. And I talked about this. I had Caffrey J on the podcast a couple episodes ago, and I talked about him about it. Where like growing up, it was like, oh yeah, black people live in East Palo Alto, and it's poor, like. Black people live in poor neighborhoods. And it's like, as you get older, you're like, wait, that's kind of a fucked up way to think. Like, you grow up thinking that way. And then, once you get exposed, like I moved to the East Bay to get away from that and to experience like other cultures and to see, at that point I wasn't like shunning my white privilege by any means, but I just was like, had a curiosity because I loved hip hop and, Oakland was Oakland. I was an A's fan, all this stuff. And, I just think like, as you said, like what people can do, it's like, just expose yourself to, you got to get uncomfortable, expose yourself to areas you might not necessarily, and be okay with it. And just know that like, if you are honest with yourself and honest with other people, like you can achieve a lot of great things, like break barriers just by like being honest and real with people. Right.
I mean, I tend to think that, coming from where I come from, my background, which isn't the same as yours, but there's some similarities. And when I see people online that are sort of like trying to like reason with like white supremacists, like, or people that support Trump, it like I'm never gonna be a person that says like there's no point in having a conversation with anyone. But it's hard for me to see someone who like, as of July 16th, 2020, that like still supports Trump after everything he said, everything that's happened.
Yeah, it's real.
It's hard for me to think that it's a matter of like that they can be reasoned with to seeing things. You know what I mean? To me, I tend to think of those people as like they're dyed-in-the-wool racists. Their view of race and their view of white people as supreme is so fundamental to their worldview that like removing that would be like removing their lung or removing their heart from them. And so I tend to think that like reasoning or talking with those people is a waste of time, especially because when it's like people of color trying to do it, there will be so much gaslighting and so much verbal abuse that it's like almost more harmful. So, you know, it's like if it's your mom or your uncle or your brother or your sister and it's your family member and you want to try to reason with those people, I guess. But I mean, when I guess what I was saying earlier, like when I say that blood's going to have to spill, like blood's going to have to spill because if there's still like 50, 100, 150, 200 million people in this country that think that the Trump worldview is a legitimate worldview, I don't think that there's any, I mean, every single bit of evidence in the world is, you know, contrary to that worldview. And yet, you know, they're sort of just like, you know, like the people that say like, oh, well, white people are under attack or white people are oppressed, you know?
Yeah, I don't get that. I don't,
Like, no, it's so nonsensical.
or like, you know, the freedom of like,
how is there going to be like a reasoning with this person or like a debate that like convinces them, you know what I'm saying? It's just like, they need to believe that to validate whatever you know, sort of like their worldview. They need to feel superior to other people, basically. And I've been doing a lot of research and studying on the alt-right and on the right wing. And ultimately, like a lot of the different sort of like philosophies about different systems of the world break down to like a worldview that believes that people are all equal and that we can have some kind of government. It could be anarchism. It could be what we have now, some form of liberal democracy. It could be communism, whatever. But basically, the goal is is based on the predisposition that everyone is essentially equal. And the alt-right doesn't believe that. The alt-right believes that like the people that historically conquered other people were better people because they had better technology, they fought better, whatever.
yeah.
And I'm seeing a lot of that stuff come out on a lot of threads. People are sort of becoming more open about it. White people are becoming more open about it, and it's often white men that are just sort of like, yeah, we are better. So people that have that kind of worldview, I don't know that there's going to be a lot of like changing of the minds through like vigorous debate or anything like that.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't, you know, to be clear, I wasn't necessarily talking about that. I guess I was talking about more like someone from our background that like,
Yeah. And
no, it is, yeah, yeah.
I didn't think I wasn't saying that as a rebuttal to you. I was just
right.
Like for people like us that like are white guys who like maybe were sheltered in certain ways. Although I grew up like in the Fillmore in San Francisco, but like still like in essentially a working middle class white family.
Right.
And sort of like there were things I learned by interacting with people of color that I didn't realize. And like listening to hip hop growing up and observing things in my community, things that I didn't observe myself. I didn't feel threatened by the police at a very young age. My friends did.
Yeah.
And so that was a process of learning. But I guess what I'm saying is that there's a big section of American white males, white people, that even presented with that same upbringing, with that same information, that same data, will still sort of like come to the position that like that black person that got shot by the police had it coming to them. They deserved it. That person is homeless because they're stupid. You know what I mean? Like basically they need a society where like there's winners and losers. And so, yeah, that's going to have to be reckoned with at some point because I think that's always been a big part of the United States. Trump has sort of like flipped that rock over and all these like all the ugliness is scurrying out from under it, but it's always been there.
Yeah. I mean, in one way, that's why you can consider him a blessing, is that, like, he's a piece of shit, he's a dumpster fire, but, like, he was able to... He's a mirror, and he was able to uncover all that. He was able to bring it all out of the undershadows. Where, like, you know, going back to growing up in Palo Alto, you know, it's considered a pretty liberal area, and it's a lot different than it was even in the 90s you know, as far as cost of living and stuff. But I don't want to get into those details. We used to call it shallow. The nickname for those that were kind of in the know back then was Shallow Alto, right? Like, but I bet you even back then there was, because I remember, you know, we did a grade school poll back when it was like, you know, Reagan and Dukakis, and all of us grade school kids voted for Reagan just because, like, it was the American way, like, you know, like, you know what I mean? And it's, like, basically what I'm getting at is, like, even in a place like, oh, Stanford, okay, it's got the Hoover Institute, like, it's considered a liberal, you know, Silicon Valley area, but there's a lot of underlying stuff there, and, you know, come to find out that, yeah, there were the redlining, you know, laws, and that's why East Palo Alto and Palo Alto is the dichotomy that it is. And
obviously, I'm not from Palo Alto, but when you say that, what I think of is the wealth in Palo Alto, and I think that, like, Palo Alto is a place that's probably, in my knowledge and my experience, the few times I've been there, is like socially pretty liberal and also very wealthy. So Reagan is someone who promised tax cuts for rich people. He promised trickle down economics. So why, and that also makes me think of, like, why the people like Trump and Reagan exist, because it's like, if they ultimately are about preserving the economic rule of the 1%, they would never get elected, because there aren't enough 1%ers to put them to win a popular vote in the United States.
Yeah.
So they have to bring in these cultural issues to sort of, like, make working class and poor white people vote against their class interests and vote for someone that's going to, like, make, you know, taxes lower for rich people, cut social services, reduce all the things that benefit poor people in the United States. And so that's how they got a lot of people, you know, to vote for Reagan and Bush. And Trump is sort of like maybe a more visceral version of that, but it's really not that different. Like, you know, Reagan, I don't know if you saw the Roger Stone documentary on Netflix, but it's really good because it talks about...
Is that the series where there's different, each episode is about a specific, or is it specific?
No, it's just a documentary on Roger Stone, but it talks about, like...
yes, Roger Stone, yes.
Yeah, it's called Get Me Roger Stone.
Yes, I have seen that.
Republican operative.
Yep.
But he really, like, he came up with Nixon, but when he really became, like, this guy that basically was known as someone that would do any kind of, like, crazy racist shit to get somebody elected was with Reagan. And, you know, people tend to think of Reagan as this, like, kinder, gentler Republican compared to Trump, but in a lot of ways it's just sort of like a natural progression. It's gotten more and more and more racist because they've been appealing more and more to a disenfranchised, poor, white working class that doesn't have the jobs that it had. They couldn't sell that shit in the 50s because, like, American industry was building, you know, you could have a working class job and be a white person in the United States and buy a house and send your kid to college. And then they started sending all these jobs overseas and, you know, down south and up north. And you have, like, an embittered white working class that feels, because of their skin color, entitled to certain things that they're not getting. And it's very easy to tell that class, well, that's because it's immigrants and black people and they're controlled by the Jews. And that's
right.
Sort of like, that's how this is all happening. And that's, Trump has just been, like, the most guttural manifestation of that. But I mean, Reagan and Bush and all the recent, and even Clinton to a large degree with welfare reform, they all kind of were part of the same demonizing terminology. So sorry, I'm on a tangent.
No, but I mean that's the thing. Like, you know, white working class and you know, black working class have a lot more similar than the people that are trying to, you know, put it aside, like you said, the Trump and the 1% and things. So, like you said, there is that portion of those folks that are, you know, that have those racist ideals that I don't think we can get to, but I think there is, you know, that core of working class folks that really believe in, you know, all those ideals and the worldview that you were talking about. But the other thing I was saying is, like, disparage the Jews. Are we ready to get into Nick Cannon? Are we ready to go there? Is that left field?
Yeah, sure. Let's get into
it. Just because you brought, I mean, like, we can keep talking about, but just because you're talking about disparaging, the Jews that took over the economy, kind of thing. I really don't know what he said. I actually am just kind of picking it up on other people's social media posts. Really, like, I really
kind of went crazy. And actually, the day it kind of went crazy, the day his statement or his interview or whatever came out, I was kind of offline. I like once a week or once every couple weeks, I try to take a day off social media completely.
That's really smart. That's
not
really
always
smart.
easy, but usually what I'll do is like turn my phone off and like just get absorbed in a book or something.
Go for a bike ride.
Yeah, I try, but so yeah. I mean, basically, essentially, I don't know. Now I'm having trouble thinking of exactly. He basically said like, blacks are the real Jews. Jews of today aren't actual Jews. Blacks were the original Jews, and the Jews are the Jews of today, like white Jews, stole Judaism from black people. The inference is that they sort of like created anti-black racism, and that sort of like the Jews control the media, and so like all this, it's like these very sort of like kind of tired anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish sort of like conspiracy things that like were all created by white supremacists and actual Nazis, and it's disheartening to see black people picking them up, or I mean anyone.
Right? Yeah.
That's obviously like if you're talking about black liberation and using theories that were recycled from like actual white supremacists, you like probably not what you want to. That's probably not those probably aren't the ideas you want to be using.
Yeah.
But through the Nation of Islam and I think the Nation of Islam has done a lot of good, and has.
Well, I was going to say that sounded a lot like Farrakhan stuff. Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
there was some Farrakhan stuff. There was some like Illuminati stuff. It was Nick Cannon. There was some Black Israelite stuff, which is another group. So it's like a lot of it's like in a classic Nick Cannon. Like I haven't really read any of this shit, but I've like read bits of parts of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just sort of this thing. And so then, of course, he was fired by Viacom, and his show Wildin' Out or whatever that's on Viacom. So instead of it being an opportunity for there to be dialogue about these things, he was fired, which I think was a mistake.
Yeah, we can get into the whole cancel culture thing. That's a whole other subject. But
yeah, because I think like in certain instances, like when a white person says something racist against black people, they probably should be fired. They should lose their sort of pulpit from which they preach. But I think when it's a black person talking about a white ethnic group, it's slightly different, and it should be an opportunity for dialogue. And yeah, the fact that he got fired then sort of like martyred him, and then it sort of fed into the idea that like, oh, of course, he spoke out against the Jewish media, and the Jewish media fired him. So of course, that sort of like confirms that like the Jews run the media.
Right.
Which is sort of like this classic stereotype. I'm like, I'm Jewish, like. I don't have any relatives that control any media, so like,
yeah,
it's not true. It's and more than anything, it's like it's one thing to be like, oh, there's a lot of Jewish people that work as executives in Hollywood, which is true. For Jews being 3% of the population of the U.S. or whatever, like there's like 6 or 7 prominent Jewish people that work high up in Hollywood. Studios. So instead of being like, wow, Jews have done really well in Hollywood and like are creative and are good at movies or whatever, it's this thing of like Jews control the media. So it's like how we talk about social phenomenon in a way that doesn't oppress one particular ethnic group. It's the difference between saying like black people run the NBA versus like, black, which obviously people wouldn't say because black people are represented as players in the NBA, but not in like the ownership.
Exactly. I was just going to say the ownership, right? How many? There are some black owners, but very few, right? Jay-Z comes to mind.
But it's just sort of like talking about things in a way that, and I think I get it. Like anti-Semitism it's not common, especially in the current context that we're talking about with Black Lives Matters and all that kind of shit. It's hard to like think about like, oh, we need to think about white groups that are historically oppressed groups. But Jewish people are a historically oppressed group. They're not currently oppressed, but if you look at a lot of what's coming out of the alt-right presently is a lot of anti-Semitic shit and a lot of sort of like, this is actually resulting in actual attacks on Jews. So I think Jews need to be in solidarity with people of color, and people of color also need to be in solidarity with Jews. I think like that's how we're going to win. And I don't think that that's served by black people or anybody sort of like rehashing like white supremacist, far right, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds and banking, and so that's kind of all the stuff that that Nick Cannon put out there. He talked about like the Jews controlling banking and the Rothschild family. It's really like this like Illuminati 101 shit that's like the shit that you hear in like 5th or 6th grade, and it's just like, wow, this dude's in his 40s and like he's still like putting this shit out, and it's just like. But I mean, you saw a lot of that shit during the protests too. I saw a lot of like homies, black, white, and otherwise, putting out the thing about like, oh, BLM is Black Lives Matter is George Soros controls that. He's funding protesters, and that is a far right conspiracy talking point. And it's really weird to see these things infiltrate people that are like left kind of or like from oppressed groups. It's like you really realize what you're saying, like. And it's like you logically think about it and you're like, why would someone say George Soros is funding BLM? You can see why the right wing would say it, because that completely delegitimizes the demand of that Black Lives Matter. It's like, oh no, there's a rich white Jewish guy named Soros funding them. So black people aren't really upset. There isn't really an issue with police killing black people. It's this rich white guy who's funding people to protest in the streets about it for political purposes. So why would any black person or anyone that knows that there really is a civil rights issue with police killing black people embrace that conspiracy theory of Soros funding BLM? But I saw a lot of people posting that shit. So I think these conversations need to be entered in respectfully. Like I don't think black people should be attacked. I don't think Nick Cannon should be fired because people just don't know. But I also think like people, especially people that are wealthy, that have a pulpit from which to talk, have a responsibility to educate themselves. And when someone like Nick Cannon is like saying really dangerous anti-Semitic shit that could get Jewish people fucked up behind, you know what I mean, could get us killed or hurt behind, I think he has more responsibility to like be educated on that shit. So it's hard for me because I've been a Jewish person who my entire life was raised to speak up for black people. So it puts me in a weird position to be like, kind of pointing the finger at a black person and being like, hey, you gotta show my people some respect. So it's awkward for me.
Yeah.
But I also realize that some of that awkwardness comes from internalized anti-Semitism, an internalized belief that like I don't deserve that same respect. You know what I'm saying? So that's also something I have to work through.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to unpack there, and I was going to say too that it's okay. I mean, it's one thing to be critical of, you know, say the Israeli government stance on, you know, the colonialism of the West Bank, of the Palestinian, you know, land, right?
Right, but he didn't talk about Israel really. He said he was going to go to Israel.
Yeah, that's a whole separate thing. But what I'm getting at is like, you know, it's okay to be critical, and I guess, you know, you can argue, even though that the state of Israel is a religious state, you can't put like, you know, the religion of of Judaism with Israel in the fact that like all Jews don't want to, you know, because like there are Israelis that are like, you know, going into where we have deemed Palestinian land and said, okay, here's where Palestinians are supposed to live safely, and they're going in and taking those lands, right? In their I forget what they call it, homesteading or
the settlements.
The settlements, you know, and you know, it's okay to be critical of something like that. When you're literally, in my opinion, I'm actually, you know, my grandmother on my mom's side was Jewish. I'm technically Jewish, but I wasn't raised Jewish. But that to me is very hypocritical of an oppressed people who they're being the oppressors again. It seems like, right? Like, so to be critical of that versus
Israel has presented itself as the country of Jews, but it's not. It's a country of a very small number of Jews. Worldwide, it's like, I don't know, less than 5% of Jews live in Israel. There's more Jews in New York City than there are in the country of Israel. Israel has sort of like, through the lie of Zionism, has presented this idea that like that's the Jews' natural homeland, and people want to equate the politics of Israel with the politics of what being a Jew is, and they're separate conversations because Israel is not Judaism and Judaism is not Israel. Although Israel does things in the name of Judaism, most Jews in the world either don't care about or aren't supportive of Israel. But Israel, because Israel and Zionism has established a country, they've been able to sort of like be like, oh, we speak for Jews, but they don't speak for Jews. Jews such as myself and many other Jews around the world don't support Israel and don't support Zionism on a range of ground of bases, but primarily on the idea that Israel is oppressing Palestinians who lived there before Israel was established. But there's also like a large swath of Orthodox and Hasidic Jews who don't support Israel because they believe it goes against the Torah and it goes against the Talmud. So there's lots of people. There's lots of Jews that don't support Israel, and the conversations about what Israel does to Palestinians and in Palestine, it's dangerous to conflate it with the conversations about what it means to be a Jew in the United States, because so many of the conspiracy theories that exist, the right-wing conspiracy theories, such as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, try to conflate those things. They try to basically say like, oh, Zionism is about conquering, taking over land, and also like running the banks, and they're going to do here what they do in Israel. So it's important for me as a Jewish person to always kind of like separate those conversations. But like you said, that you can have a debate and have a discussion about any ethnic group, I suppose. But when you start sort of being like, this group controls that, this group is essentially that, and what also here, I have a note here on it, but what he said was, he said Jews are savages. So basically, he said black people are the original Jews, and the Jews that we think of today are savages. So,
which is offensive to anyone, just calling.
You're calling an entire race of people savages. Now, if you want to, if that's your position, that's your position. But like, I don't know. Like, I think like sort of like these are sort of like I don't see Nick Cannon as someone that's like, maybe he has, but I don't. Based on what he said, he doesn't strike me as someone that's done a lot of reading or research. These are sort of like things he's heard from Farrakhan or different other people, and is sort of like saying them. And it's like, if you call an entire global population of people savages, like you're probably going to piss people off.
Yeah, a little blowback.
Yeah. So to see people being like, oh, I can't believe they fired Nick Cannon. That's fucked up. It's it's kind of hard for me because it's like, well, he called my people savages. He called me a savage. So it's a little difficult, but I also think that like he probably shouldn't have been fired. It should have been an opportunity for dialogue, because it's also sort of like martyring him. Like now people are sort of like, oh, the Zionist conspiracy is like sacrifice Nick Cannon, but it is what it is. It's a really difficult issue, and I think a lot of it also really invisibilizes Black Jews. There's a lot of Black Jews. There's a lot of biracial Jews. There's a lot of African American Jews. There's also Jews from Africa. And to talk about this, have this conversation happening that sort of like pits Jews against Black people, which seems to keep happening every 5 or 10 years. It really invisibilizes Black Jews and Jews of color, which there are millions and millions of worldwide, which is really unfortunate because it's like almost you're acting like those folks don't exist, because it's like you're Black or you're Jewish and we're opposed to each other. Like if you come out like Nick Cannon and say, well, the original Jews stole Judaism from Black people, then if you're a Black Jew now, that means you don't exist? Like it's a very oppressive and invisibilizing discourse for many people in the Jewish community, especially Jews of color and Black Jews. So, yeah, there's a lot of reasons to be critical of what Nick Cannon said, and I wish it would have been a way for us to sort of have a dialogue around it. It's happening now, but it's happening in a very polarized way because he got fired, and people are like, "Oh, this is another case of white supremacy," sort of like being violent towards a Black person who speaks out against it. When in fact, I don't think that's actually what's happening in this instance. I think it's a more subtle conversation because we're talking about a white group, predominantly white group Jews that have historically been oppressed and are currently sort of like the target of the far right. So it's sort of unfortunate to see, but yeah, we're dealing with it now. People are dealing with it on the internet.
Yeah, but I mean that just speaks to the cancel culture. Is like we don't give folks a chance, and as you alluded to, maybe certain white folk don't get that chance because they've had privilege. But for someone like we can go down that rabbit hole. But more about Nick Cannon was misinformed. Nick Cannon was misinformed, and we're in an age of misinformation, and yet we don't give him the opportunity for someone, an elder or a sage, to come along and be like, hey, like you did, like actually that narrative is actually like bullshit that the KKK or white supremacists put in place to pit each other against. I'm doing this because I didn't really prep my hair for the interview, and now I'm realizing that I have terrible hair.
As you can see, nor did I, and I'm like,
no, but you have the cool mop thing. Like when you got long hair and it's in a bun. If the bun isn't tight, then it's just like
you look like a Jedi when you put the.
Oh, cool! Then I'll keep it on. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
all right. Yeah,
like lightsaber to come out.
Well, the light's kind of there.
I think for me, it's like cancel culture is tricky because it's like that's a big talking point for the right right now. It's sort of like their way to defend white people saying racist shit is like, oh, cancel culture. That's the left wing. They want to cancel everyone. But I do agree that like when we cancel people, we're basically losing an opportunity to sort of like make them accountable for what they said. We tell them go away. We don't want to hear from you anymore. Rather than being like, no, stay right here and explain to me in depth why you said what you said. Not on some bullshit like, oh, I sincerely regret harming anyone with my careless thoughts, which is what we're getting now.
Yeah.
Love people, but like really like make people have to like
come real with it.
Go through a process and unlearn what they've learned, which is oppressive to people. And I mean it's hard. It's difficult for me to like see people that I care about reposting Nick Cannon statements and being like, yeah, Nick, I got your back, blood. They can't fuck with you. And I'm like, damn, bro, like really? Like you got his back on this shit?
Right.
Like, so it's hard, but it's also like for me, sort of like choosing spaces online, sliding into DMs and being like, hey, there's an alternate way to look at this. I'm a Jewish person and like the statements he made are oppressive and offensive to me and to my people, and they're also like dangerous, and this is why. And having those conversations sort of on a one-on-one basis, and like in a lot of cases, I feel like people have been like, "Damn, dude, I didn't even trip. You're hella right." There've been some people that have been like, "Nah, bro, like you don't know about the trilateral commission and the Illuminati." And it's like people are deeply invested. Some people are deeply invested in conspiracy theories, and like it's hard to kind of come at them with facts because there's a reason why they ran the conspiracy theories in the first place.
Right.
But with a lot of the one-on-one interactions I've been having with folks, and honestly, some of my friends who are Black who aren't Jewish have been some of the most supportive too. That have been like really, really like have my back on it. So it's been cool. You know, I think a lot of Jewish people are like, what do I say? I don't want to sound racist. I don't want to go off on Black people, but this is offensive. But should I be offended? And again, that's also the internalized anti-Semitism that a lot of Jews have, where they're like, some of them believe that shit, that Jews control the media or that Jews control banking. Like some Jews believe that shit because they've heard it so much growing up. They're like, oh, maybe it's true. So yeah, there's a lot of internalized anti-Semitism there too, which makes the conversations weird. And then there's like really fucked up Zionist Jews that don't give a fuck about anyone or anything.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Like, for those that don't know, I mean, I've heard the term. I don't know if I've ever like defined it, like for those like me that are really ignorant to what the term Zionist really is, and now I'm boring you because
No, I'm just late.
Yeah.
I'm old. I'm not yawning because I'm tired.
yeah.
The term Zionist
feel it.
is very specific. It's Jews that believe that Jews should have a national homeland. That national homeland is what is now called Israel, which is traditionally Palestine. Although there was a time when Zionists were looking at homelands in South Africa, South America, in Africa, and in Eastern Europe, which that would have been a long time ago. But to me, I can see a certain circumstance where I might have been supportive of a Jewish homeland, especially after World War II, after the Jewish Holocaust in World War II, Jews having their own homeland somewhere in Eastern Europe. Like I could see that having been like a viable project, although like essentially Zionism at its core is about a certain ruling section of Jews that wanted to consolidate power at the cost of most Jews and also at the cost of the Palestinians. And that's the thing that I think is important to point out, is that Zionism doesn't just oppress the Palestinians, who the Jews went and kicked out and literally like went inside Palestinian homes and shot people and took their shit and grabbed them and kicked them out and then passed a law that they could never come back. But it also like disempowers like a lot of Jews around the world, because if you're not affiliated with Zionism, with the Israeli government, you're kind of behind the eight ball as a Jewish person. So in terms of like a global politic, in terms of talking about Jewish liberation, how do I talk about Jewish liberation right now? Because people are going to be like, you got Israel, shut the fuck up, you got your liberation. So Israel had it's been way worse on Palestinians and Arabs in that region, but it also has had a really negative impact on Jews around the world, because it's sort of like hijacked liberation of Jews in this very elite and sort of like this settler colonial model, which was designed to sort of like be the model for Jewish liberation, which you can't have liberation that's predicated on the killing and the colonization of another land. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, now you have someone like Netanyahu, who is not only a Trump supporter, but like you said, like the way you described that, there's a lot of correlations you could make.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
with
like
that.
The early Zionists were like socialists. The kibbutzim, the kibbutz that were originally sort of like it's sort of like not as big of a deal in Israel. But when Israel was formed, a lot of the Jews that went to settle were coming from socialist movements in Europe, Russia, Germany, and also like not the Nazi threat, which had killed so many Jews, was defeated for the most part by Russia, which Soviet Union. So socialism and communism enjoyed a very high esteem at the time in 1948 when Israel was created. So a lot of the founding ideas of Israel were socialist, but essentially it was settler colonialism. So it could never have really been any form of real socialism, because you were kicking out other people to do it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And you were oppressing other people to do it. And so I think like the people that were concerned at the founding of Israel, they were like, this isn't cool what y'all are doing, even though you're calling it socialism or whatever. Like, they predicted what we're seeing now, which is like this sort of full-blown aggro, oppressive, terrorist colonizer state that just kills Palestinian children without a second thought. So it's not like the country is two separate things. This is what Israel always was, but it formed with like a lot of sort of like socialist, leftist sort of like, I guess, PR.
Yeah, and a lot of support. Well, that goes with support from the U.S. But getting back to what you're talking about getting in these conversations with people online that are your friends, and like, you know, pitting blacks against Jews and this kind of thing. Like, I was, you know, I guess I wasn't talking about it in that way, but I think what this movement is now, with the pandemic and the George Floyd, with the Breonna Taylor and whatever you want to call it, it's going to cause those uncomfortable situations. And it's not just a black versus white thing. It's a black versus Jew. It's a white Jew Asian, Hispanic, Latinx, I can't say Hispanic. I'm so used to, I got to get out of that mode, or even just Latin now is not, which, in my opinion, it's a slippery slope when you get into the nuances of semantics, but I think it is important for identity to have those people call themselves what they feel is comfortable. But anyways, what I'm getting at is we have to get uncomfortable in whether it be, as you alluded to, blood on the streets, or just the simple uncomfortableness that people get out of your comfort zone. Like go to a place you wouldn't normally go to and try to interact with people that you would normally, no matter what your race is or your background. And I don't know. I think that's part of it. But yeah, things are going to get sticky. And
I agree. I think the reason why Nick Cannon was being asked these questions was because of the moment we're in. Like, I think a lot of the stuff was how the conversation got to that and why people beyond outside of like different black community, Jewish community, these conversations have always been happening, but they weren't like amplified all over the media and on CNN. It's because everyone's like, what's going on in the United States? Why are people burning cop cars in the streets? And it's like, black people are like, we've been telling you for years, like, stop killing us. Yeah. Then we started demanding it, and it still didn't happen. And in fact, it's still happening while we're burning cop cars. Cops are still killing black people in the streets.
Right.
So,
and then Kaepernick tries to protest peacefully, and they don't get it, right?
Right. Like, there was a meme that was like, the police couldn't even stop doing police brutality at the police brutality protests. But yeah, I mean, but like you said, like, there's a reason why these conversations are starting to happen now. And I think, for me, as frustrating as it was to see so much sort of like head and sort of like reposting being given to like all these anti-Semitic ideas, it's also good that, like, we kind of, like you kind of addressed before with Trump, like it's being flushed out into the open, and as long as it's like sort of like happening underground, like, we're not really going to be able to talk about it and explore these issues. And like I said, a lot of the one-on-one conversations I've had with folks this week have been people being like, dude, I didn't even realize, like, I just thought white people were like Europeans. I didn't know black Jews existed. Like, I didn't know all this stuff. I didn't know all the stuff about Jewish banking was a right-wing conspiracy theory that, like, the KKK and the Nazis started. So it's been cool to see that people will hear those things and be receptive to them and be like, yeah, I don't want to be oppressive to any group. And like I said, those are the kind of folks that we're going to be able to build alliances with. And then there's certain folks that don't care if they are shitting on one group or if one group is going to get sacrificed. And those are the people that, at least me, I'm not going to build alliances with. It's, for me, it's all of us or it's none of us. You know what I mean? Like, we're all going to get free or nobody's going to get free. I think black people need to be in the leadership of any liberation movements in the United States, for sure. Yeah, it's got to be all of us. It's got to be all oppressed people need to be sort of like freed. I'm not willing to like say, oh, we'll deal with transgender people later. We'll deal with Jewish people later. We'll deal with poor people later. Nah, it's going to have to be all of us. That's the only way we're going to have a movement that's strong enough to actually win.
Yeah. And again, there's a lot to unpack, but I also want to segue into, I want to talk a lot about music with you too, but let's segue first into, because it's not a professional, but Wait I Am, that's the name of the subtitle of the podcast. You're a social worker, you're an activist, you're an educator. So talk about how that's important to you, not only to balance, sometimes you're not DJing 9 to 5, obviously you get paid well for that, but you want to be able to support yourself. So talk about balancing that with your day job, but why it's also important with your worldview and your beliefs, and just being compassionate about that and making a difference and working with youth and how that's important to you.
Yeah, I mean, I was a professional DJ full time for about 15 years, about 2000 to 2015, and it was great. I made good money and I had a lot of fun. And I got to, wake up at 4 p.m. You know what I mean? It was cool. But yeah, I mean, I think as I got older, I realized that, like, there was a lot more. And then I was doing I've always been sort of in the activism lane. I was doing that in my spare time, and I felt like I was living these two very separate worlds. Yeah, I think I wanted to do something that felt maybe more integrative of those two worlds. And social work is, specifically social work with young people, with teenagers in SF, mostly. Comes in a way that I've sort of found like a middle ground where I feel like I can do activism, I can do something that helps my city, San Francisco, out, hopefully, and still sort of have like the ability to like pick and choose DJ gigs that I want to do, because music and sort of nightlife is something that still is important to me. So that's kind of where I'm at. It's been going well. I'm getting older, so the 2-3 a.m. DJ gigs are getting a little harder, but yeah, I'm out here.
Nice. Yeah, and you worked at talk about your experience at youth radio. I know that's definitely melding as far as teaching the technical skills of the equipment, but also mic presence and picking the right song and just those kind of skills, but melding that with teaching youth.
Yeah, so that was really, I was DJing full time until sort of Mike Lee from Youth Radio was like, hey, I know you have your MSW, and I got my MSW at Cal in like 2005, but like I said, from 2000 to about 2015, I was DJing full time. So really, I wasn't really tripping. And he would come see me DJ, and he was just like, man, would you consider being a social worker at Youth Radio? Because we do a lot of stuff with music and with graphic design, and I feel like having someone who can help the kids with their psychosocial needs, but someone who comes from that background of like music and stuff would be a really good combo. And he just got at me at the right time, and I was like, yeah, I've really been thinking about kind of like doing something that integrates these two parts of me that feel very separate: the music and social work and activism. So that became the place where I sort of stopped working full time as a DJ. I was still working full time as a DJ, but I was also working full time at Youth Radio. It was an after school it's an after school program, so that allowed me to sort of like go into work around 11 or 12 still, so I could still do my DJ gigs and be out late. And I did that for like 3 or 4 years, and then I realized that like social work was really something I wanted to do, and I wanted to dig a little deeper than I could at Youth Radio with sort of like the therapeutic aspects of social work. And I also felt like I really wanted to be doing something in my city, in San Francisco. As much as I love Oakland, and as much as Oakland is like welcomed me and been like a second home for me, I'm a city boy, I'm a Frisco boy, and being a product of SF Unified School District, an opportunity came up for me to go to do social work at FFUSD, and so that's where I've been, and it's been pretty rewarding. It's weird now, obviously, in quarantine, doing social work over the computer, over Zoom, and
how's that affected your kids? Have you noticed a difference?
It's been hard. Like our kids have sort of vanished. Like especially the school I work at is for kids that haven't really succeeded at traditional high school. So they're at this high school, which is a secondary school, and they're dealing with a lot of pressures to get money, a lot of pressures to support themselves. So they already kind of have one foot in and one foot out. So when the quarantine hit in March, it was hard for me to get in touch with them, and I wasn't really allowed to go out on the streets and go look for them, because at least for the first month and a half, we were really like, we were supposed to keep our asses inside.
Yeah.
And like sort of trying to reach out to them through like the official school Zoom and Google Hangouts was like not working. So, but I knew I could find the kids, but it was sort of, I was limited in the creativity I could use as a social worker, which is one of my, as a creative person.
You had to break protocol a little bit, huh? You had to break protocol a little bit.
Well, I mean, I wasn't able to. Eventually it's like, finding them on Instagram, finding them on different social media platforms. And just because I was worried about them and wanted to make sure that they weren't sick or dying or homeless. So my social work really shifted from like really helping them work on deeper issues about self-love, and about like behaviors and consequences and all the kind of stuff, to really about like, are your basic needs getting met? Are you eating? Are you a young woman that like, because of the quarantine, is now cohabitating with an abusive partner? Like it was like a very like basic safety check level type of thing. And now that SFUSD announced today that we're going to resume distance learning for the next semester because COVID isn't going anywhere. So, yeah, it's going to continue to be challenging, but, you know, it's something that we just have to work with because, you know, the kids, we can't ask them to come back to school and possibly get sick. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah, I mean it's a blessing and a curse. I mean, I was just gonna say my friends have school age children, not in San Francisco, and but you know they're already thinking of a plan B, and you know for kids like that, the school is good in a way because it's structured that they might not have, and you know there's great folks like you that are taking care of them, and I would say kind of like an uncle or an extended family member, or even not just a role model that they can look to that's just outside of the family structure, which is important. I think people need to have that, but you want that. We all want it to go back into place, but it's also not safe for us to do it, right? So you know, we're at this weird time where some of it's good, some of it's bad, and you know, on the whole, when we hear about it on a global or even national or city or statewide, most people are like, "Oh, thank God that they decided, you know, to resume distance learning. That's going to be safer medically." But then, what a lot of people don't realize is the flip side of that is, as you just alluded to, is that there's you know resources there that the kids don't have, and you know food, nutrition, all that
and
stuff.
the parents, how are the parents supposed to go back to work if
Right.
the kids are at home?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
and then it's like public schools. We're talking about working class families. We're mostly talking about families where like both parents are working. Sometimes the kids are working, and all the pressure that's putting on families. And we know what pressure does to families. Like it can exacerbate abuse. It can exacerbate stress. It can exacerbate depression. So in many ways, it makes the presence of a social worker even more important. But it's like I'm the social worker on a TV screen, and so
Yeah.
it can feel not tangible. So these are things that like we're learning now. We're making this road by walking it. We're learning how to do social work through a computer screen, and it's challenging. But you know, we'll get it because we have to get it.
Yeah.
We have to take care of these kids. But yeah, it's definitely a challenging time. And luckily or unluckily, I'm not going to have DJ gigs to distract myself with because nightclubs aren't going to be back for at least another 6 months, probably not till 2022. So,
It's crazy.
Yeah, that's another reality of like my entire work being has shifted. Like I don't know if I'm ever going to DJ a club again.
Yeah.
Because by the time clubs might be reopened, I may be just like it might be a year or two, and I might be like, I'm over it. I don't want to DJ anymore. Like that's a long time. So I'm in a, like many people, like almost everyone else, I'm in a period of like kind of unknown right now. And we'll see how it goes.
All right, that's a good segue. What we'll do now is we'll talk more about music. We talked about all the heavy stuff. Let's get nerdy with the music. I'm going to be a fanboy of yours, as you alluded to. You know, I'm a huge Outkast fan as well. And when you were able to, you know, figure out, you alluded to that, you know, they made the global the shift of hip hop to Atlanta, but then you know years later of recent in the last I don't know was it 5 years or so, you've been able to create the Outkast set that you do monthly, and then you even went out there, and you know Big Boy had his like Budweiser series cans and all that stuff, and just you know it's sort of like this you know this like you know dream becoming a reality. First it's like it's a night to honor Outkast, and then it kind of melts, and then you know you bridge that gap and you get to meet him and just talk about that journey.
Yeah, so the artist storytelling party is a party I throw annually in Oakland, and at different times we've done it annually in LA and annually in New York. Right now, obviously, everything is sort of like who knows what's going to happen. It doesn't feel like it's going to be happening for sure in 2020. Hopefully, it'll happen in 2021. I guess we'll see. But yeah, I mean, I used to throughout my career, I see myself as a curator as well as a DJ, or let me rephrase that. I see myself as a DJ who sees curation as a big part of what I do. There's different kinds of DJs. There's DJs that like really flex technical skills. There's DJs that really about just like catering to the crowd. For me, I was never a great technical DJ. I never wanted to completely cater to the crowd. I always felt like, without being sort of like a snobby elitist guy, I always felt like I wanted to tell a story with my sets. So one of the ways I found to do that was sort of like doing tribute sets. I'd be like, oh, we're going to do a tribute set for Raphael Sadiq, or we're going to do a tribute set tonight for Shaka Khan, but within sort of like a night that I've already created, or a DJ set of 4 or 5 hours that is understandable to people, whereas like 5 hours of Shaka Khan and all the different music that influenced her, that she produced or sang on, like, or wrote on, might be too much. But saying like we're gonna do an hour of Shaka in the midst of a party that plays like R&B and rap and all this other stuff. And so I did an Outkast party, and it was just probably without surprise, it was like the response was amazing, because Outkast, more than any of those groups I already named, like really wanted to make club music. Like they talked about that the music sort of like had to have the 808 kick, and like they tailored their music very specifically for clubs, and that became sort of like a feature of Atlanta rap music, starting in the late 90s and moving into now what we call trap and post-trap or whatever, being made for strip clubs, dance clubs, various forms of like loud sound systems where people are dancing and or moving their body, gyrating their body rhythmically. So it sort of clicked in my head that like, yeah, as a tribute party, Outkast works really well, because damn near all of their music is like club music. Whereas some other artists, like their oeuvres of music range from like very mellow to clubby to other stuff. So down the line, I decided to do a night that was entirely Outkast, not just an hour or two within a night, but an actual night that was dedicated to Outkast. And again, the response was crazy, and I was like, I think I got something here. It also doesn't hurt that Outkast is probably my favorite rap group of all time. I love their music. I've always connected with it, just on a very deep personal level. So it was selfish for me to do the party that was all Outkast, because it's music that I would play for myself just to listen to, because I love their music so much. So I had a lot of fun doing it. It was at a time in my DJ career when I'd been DJing 25 years. So to like be able to throw a party that like really excited me and connected me with the music, when you've been doing it 25 years, sometimes those kind of nights are harder to find. So I think it was something that sort of preserved and strengthened my DJ career. And yeah, I mean, it also, the response has been great. Like, especially for the party we do in Oakland, it sells out every year. We get like 600, 700, 800 people at the Starline, which I heard may be closing.
Oh no!
Yeah, a lot of shit is closing, man.
It's really
like
sad.
Like asking a lot of independent businesses to like survive for a month or two is one thing, but now it's like we're talking about 4 or 5 months.
Right.
Independent businesses aren't going to be able to do that.
No.
It sucks, because
they're paying rent just like the rest of us, right?
Yeah, but like the Walmarts are going to be fine. So it's like this. We're going to really be in this dystopian reality of like all we got are these like massive box chain stores, and all the cool independent places that we like weren't able to survive. So it's hard to not somehow feel that like this pandemic is turning out exactly how sort of like Trump and them really wanted it to. But anyway, yeah. So the Outkast party will continue even if we do it online. It's definitely going to continue. I'm not done doing it. And it's been a joy to do it, and it's also been a joy to like think of different ways to highlight storytelling outside of just the music itself. I'm sorry.
That's all good.
The way we ultimately want to make it is like a literary arts festival, and really make it about storytelling in a lot of ways. The second artist storytelling party we did, actually have one right here. We made a zine. We made a zine that was like, we encouraged people to do writing about the artists, about Outkast, writing inspired by Outkast. And we got a bunch of submissions. We got some really dope artwork. We made some stickers, got an Andre and a Big Boy sticker. inspired by the art of Kerry James Marshall, obviously. Yeah, I've always wanted to be more than just a dance party. And so that's ultimately, hopefully, what we're pushing for. My ultimate vision is to have it be like a multi-city, multi-generational, 2 or 3 day weekend literary arts festival that includes spoken word, printmaking, music, dancing, poetry workshops, something for kids that really like encourages people to tell their stories in whatever way, shape, or form. And that is something that has always resonated with me with Outkast music, was the truth of their story. Whether it was like Big Boy talking about pimping hoes, or Andre talking about like some really deep spiritual philosophical shit, they it always came off as a very authentic telling a story of themselves. Um, and that's why I was connected with their music, because I think there's many of us have both of those sides, that Aquemini side, that Aquarius side that's like very logical and calculating, and that Gemini side that's very like bursts of creativity. And they were always able to encapsulate that in their music. They didn't try to sound like each other. They didn't try to say we're going to make, one coherent theme. And even when it got to the point where they both evolved so much in their own direction, they put out a double album, which was like half Big Boy and half Andre,
Right.
because they were like,
Speaker box, yeah.
yeah, we've moved in such different directions, but we're still a unit. But yeah, that party and Outkast are very, very important to me and precious to me. And so yeah, I'm really happy that I have that outlet still.
So do you think that with the new format, everyone's streaming now, obviously streaming their DJ sets, like there's the whole issue of like, copyright getting shut down, but do you think this new format lends itself to DJs of your style that aren't as clubby or scratchy or technically, hey, I got a totally edited set I'm going to come correct with. I want it to be more fluid and kind of, go where the night goes, or curate it more like an art gallery. Do you think this new streaming form, with being able to incorporate chat and other multimedia in sort of a webinar kind of, I know that's kind of a hokey, corny term, but that kind of multimedia experience, I think that's where it's headed as a genre, or just DJs more of your ilk are just it's easier for them to approach it?
For me, no. For me, maybe it's my age. I don't know what it is, but like for me, DJing with people there, a dance floor, people dancing, is the essence of what DJing is. And the 3 or 4 times I've done streaming over the quarantine, it has felt really uncomfortable. It almost felt like my first time ever DJing. I felt like people were doing this, like watching me DJ. And I was self-conscious about how I looked. I was self-conscious about my hair. I was self-conscious about am I dancing enough? And I was not thinking about the music I was playing, which is which is all I think about when I'm DJing in a club. So I will say for me, no. I think what it's going to be, it's opening up for a whole nother set of DJs that are more comfortable DJing streaming. A younger generation of DJs, I think, that are more comfortable with sort of like DJing with people logging on, logging off, DJing with 5 people, DJing with 5,000 people, like being flexible in that respect. Like that's not my thing, but I think it is going to be the thing for a new generation of DJs. So I'm excited to see what comes out of it. It's probably going to be the end of the road for me as a DJ, but that's fine. I mean, I've been DJing 25, 30 years. Like I've had an amazing career. And I think like the technology and the means and the forums in which people DJ always change. And I'm excited to see what happens. I'm hopeful that, we kind of go back to like having nightlife. But I'm not sure when that's going to be and if that's going to be. So I guess we're going to have to see. Also, I think like you're saying, like the online streamings, the DJ streaming sets right now feel very rudimentary. And I think if this does become sort of like what DJing is going to be for the next few years, I think the technology is going to advance and we're going to have it's going to be a lot more interesting, like backdrops and like people being able to see each other and, different people being able to like stream in different ways. And so I think it'll become cooler and more dynamic. And I look forward to seeing that too. But as of right now, I don't watch DJ streams. I don't participate in them really. It's just not my thing.
Yeah. The verses, I know you got to go here, but I just like the verses thing caught me off guard because I thought it was going to be like a DJ battle versus, but they're just like playing tracks. Like to me, it's like the most boring thing you could ever watch. It's like some dude just sitting around listening to their own music. You know what I mean? Like I don't know.
It is. It does feel like oh, this could have been so much better. But also, it's like the first one, I guess, or one of the early ones was the Teddy Riley one, and it was so epically bad with Teddy.
Right.
Or not.
Because he was trying to do too much with the against Babyface, right?
So now I think there's like people tune in just to see. It's become like with the Jadakiss versus Fabulous one. It was like it's memeable. You know what I mean? It's like these famous artists, these legendary artists, like being like, and Jadakiss was like really drunk, and like Teddy Riley was like he's just really old and doesn't know the technology.
Yeah.
So I think it's like almost become this like let's watch this just to see like what kind of shit show kind of stuff pops off. But like like a DJ battle would be really interesting, like in a way where like someone's curating the music versus like these artists playing their own music. It's just kind of like, really, this is what it is?
Yeah. Or they trade fours like in jazz, right? Like you get four beats, you know, or like, you know, they do that sometimes in freestyling, right? Where it's like, I'm going to say like 4 bars and then trade off 4 bar, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, jazz guys used to battle. They would they call it cutting or whatever.
Yeah.
Where they would like play six bars, you play 8 bars. And it's like playing the most insane notes, hitting the most crazy notes. Charlie Parker was known as the dude that like was undefeated, that nobody could ever beat. You know, like he could just hit notes that no one else could hit. But yeah, I mean, like that battle spirit is ingrained in black music, and it's really important to hip hop. And it was cool. The versus thing was a cool concept in a way, but it just, I think with the quarantine, because like so much up, it was like it was everything. Like there was like 1 million people that tuned into the Teddy Riley one, the Teddy Riley Babyface one. It was just because there's nothing else for people to do, so it kind of became overblown a little bit. I guess Swizz Beatz was behind it, so it kind of, you know, it wasn't like just a completely grassroots endeavor. There was some like people that put some real marketing money into it and stuff. So.
Well, as you allude to, it shines to light that some of the younger artists might be more like have been studio musicians or SoundCloud artists that worked their way up learning. But you know, the older cats, you know, they came in, they had a studio engineer, all that kind of stuff, and that shows the sort of like tech barrier. So. I think it's interesting.
Like for them just to play their music over the internet was like a challenge.
Yeah.
But then it's also like these are the guys that have built up decades of music that you would be interested in seeing a versus battle. You know, like these younger artists that are more technically adept, like they don't have a canon of music that is worth being in a battle. Like the battle would be 10 minutes, you know what I mean? So
it's true.
It's like a balance of the two. I was really excited about the Beanie Man versus Bounty Killer one, which was pretty good. But yeah, again, it was weird seeing the artists kind of like just kind of playing the songs and half performing them. Yeah. It was just kind of like, it was weird. It felt very like 2020, like
yeah, there you go, yeah, right.
Our reality that we're in, and it's like you can't complain because it's like this is what we have because we can't have nightlife and concerts. But it was also like, what the fuck is this? Like, it's just so weird. Like this year, it's just like every morning I wake up and I'm like, it was a dream. No, it wasn't a dream. But it just feels like this weird dream that we're in with this like crazy shit happening.
Yeah, it's like a combination of Twilight Zone and Groundhog Day, and you know, I don't know,
and some kind of really dystopian sci-fi movie, like
12 Monkeys or something.
Not Blade Runner, but something like that. That's just like really dark and bad.
Yeah.
Contagion.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Yeah, we watched Outbreak. I think it was a month ago or so. Yeah, ago. But you know, you watch those movies, and it's amazing how dated. You don't remember them as dated, but then it's like, oh yeah, they're really dated.
But Outbreak really felt like, wow, there's a lot of similarities to the COVID shit, even though it's a different kind of disease. But yeah, I remember when the COVID broke out, people were like, "This is Outbreak. This is exactly Outbreak." It was like. Started in Asia and like spread slowly, and you know, Anyway,
Yeah.
It's been talking to you, man. I appreciate the time.
Absolutely.
I gotta take my ass to bed.
I was gonna say I appreciate. I know we kept you a little extra. You know, believe it or not, we're almost 2 hours in. So I really appreciate it, man. It's been such a pleasure. Sake One on the Sam Jack podcast.
Yep.
We'll see you soon. Thank you so much, and be well, be safe.
Give my love to Rosa.
I will, and keep taking care of those kids, man. Keep up the good fight and keep educating the unwoke.
Trying, man.
All right, cool.
I'm not doing well.
You too. Peace. Thank you so much for watching the Sam Jack podcast. I, of course, am your host, Sam Jack. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, Viral Media Network. Follow us on Instagram, viralmedia.network. You can follow us on Twitter, media_viral. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube. Viral Media Network 415 is the channel. The playlist is the Sam Jack podcast. We're also on audio podcasts, iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, and lots more wherever you podcast. Just look for the Sam Jack podcast. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.